I didn't want to think about all what happened, so I just buried my past.
There were 38,000 Jews living in the northern part of Libya at the time. Today, there are none left, Mafdal Had. The community is totally extinct.
If somebody wants to understand what is going on in the Middle East, they have to understand the Jewish refugees from Arab countries.
Dissimulée derrière les gros titres du conflit au Moyen-Orient, se trouve l'histoire oubliée des communautés juives de la région. En 1945, près d'1 million de Juifs vivaient au Moyen-Orient, en dehors des frontières de la Palestine mandataire. Quelques années plus tard, il n'était plus que quelques milliers. Autrefois, les anciens quartiers juifs du Caire, de Damas et de Bagdad étaient animés et pleins de vie. Aujourd'hui, ils sont silencieux. Voici l'histoire de ces milliers d'individus qui ont fui leur maison, qui ont connu les camps de réfugiés et qui gardent aujourd'hui, en silence, la mémoire d'une civilisation détruite.
I was in Los Angeles on a business trip. I was in a hotel. There was a young lady in her mid-20s. And I could tell from her name and from her looks that she was Egyptian. So I said, Ahlan wa sahlan. He said, oh, do you speak Arabic? I said, yes. And she said, why did you leave Egypt? I said, well, I'm Jewish. He said, oh, I didn't know that there were Jews living in Egypt. And I told her the whole story. And she was shocked.
Everybody already thinks of Jews as white Europeans. Not all Jews are European.
Louloua Kazoum est la fondatrice du projet multiculturel juif et l'auteur d'une anthologie de textes de femmes juives du Moyen-Orient. Son père est réfugié de Bagdad.
When I sing traditional Middle Eastern and North African Jewish music, people will often say to me, it sounds Arabic. And I say to them, you know, we're not called cousins for no reason. What is Middle Eastern North African has come to be known as Arab. And people forget that there are many other indigenous peoples from the region, and the Jews are one of them.
En l'an 586 avant notre ère, les armées babyloniennes détruisirent le temple de Salomon à Jérusalem et exilèrent les Juifs de Judée en Babylonie, l'Irak d'aujourd'hui.
There was a short period in Jewish history where the Jews who were expelled from Palestine by the Babylonia were or had to be exiled to Babylon. So many, some hundreds of thousands of them, nobody knows exactly, had to go there.
My family is among the Jews who stayed on that land for the next 2,600 years until around 1950. Jews who stayed in the region are known as Mizrahim, which in Hebrew means Easterners. They either stayed on that land of Babylon, as my family did, or they migrated to lands throughout the region, whether it was Iran, whether it was Syria, Lebanon, Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, and so on, the entire region.
Le centre de l'héritage juif babylonien, situé près de Tel Aviv, est un musée fondé en Israël par des juifs irakiens pour commémorer l'apogée et la destruction de leur communauté d'origine.
Now we are in synagogue, which is the very ancient synagogue in Baghdad. And this is part of the museum, which is in the center. It's a very successful museum of the exile.
Mordechai Ben Porat est le fondateur de ce musée. Né en Irak, il alla à pied jusqu'à Jérusalem en 1945. Quelques années plus tard, il fut directement impliqué dans l'organisation du départ de plus de 120 000 juifs irakiens. Le musée de Ben Porat expose les textes d'anciens rabbins babyloniens qui rédigèrent le Talmud, un recueil de lois qui régit la vie juive jusqu'à nos jours. L'un de ces rabbins, qui vécut 2000 ans plus tôt dans ce qui est l'Irak actuel, s'appelait Hillel. Son nom est lié aujourd'hui à plusieurs campus universitaires à travers toute l'Amérique, où les centres pour étudiants juifs s'appellent Centre Hillel.
The Jews were about 2,600 years in Iraq, and when they came to Iraq, they came before the Arabs, before the Muslims, of course.
This question of precedence in territories is a very fascinating one, because the many Arab countries say, oh, we are an Arab country, these Jews are like intruders from the outside, and therefore we hate them. That they could say in the Christian world. The Jews, for the most part, came to the Christian world after the war of Christianity. But in many of these countries, for example, North Africa, Egypt, Babylonia, Jews preceded the Arabs by many centuries, and sometimes by millennium.
En l'an 622, une nouvelle religion émergea dans la péninsule arabique. Quelques années plus tard, les armées arabes musulmanes conquirent une grande partie du Moyen-Orient. Les Juifs de la région furent alors désignés par un mot arabe. Dhimmi.
A dhimmi or a dhamma, depending on the pronunciation, is a tolerated people. It's the people of the book, Christians and Jews, people who worship, practice the Bible. And according to Islam, this is a group that's supposed to be protected. What that means is, as Islam conquered the entire Middle East, North African region and killed people in the name of Islam if they would not convert, the Jews and Christians would be spared their lives. However, they always had to be both physically and metaphorically inferior. For example, a Jew could not ride a horse because then his head would be higher than that of a Muslim. Jews could not build a synagogue higher than a mosque.
All houses in Yemen, I mean the Jewish houses, must be lower, far lower than the Muslims. If, God forbid, one of the houses is a little bit higher than the of the Muslims, it will be pulled down.
You see, the dhimma, as I said, is juridical. It's very precise, but it has also economic, political, and social repercussions. And there are many of them. One, for example, the Jews and the Christians, by the way, had to wear special items of clothes in order to differentiate themselves. For example, the yellow patch. That's not a Nazi invention. It was invented back in the 8th century, and the Jews and the Christians were forced to wear it. The Jews and the Christians could not ride a horse, because horse is a noble animal. Only Muslim can. Jews and Christians had to ride a donkey or to walk on foot. And Jews and Christians could not build any house of prayer, new one. And even if they wanted to refurbish the old ones, they had to have a special permission. And even when they got permission, it could not be higher than the nearest mosque, in order to demonstrate exactly the point that Islam is supreme and nothing can be seen to compete with it. That's the issue.
This whole idea of dhimmi is permeated in Arab culture. It goes all the way back to the 7th century. In some Arab countries, it was more important, like in Yemen, for example, or in Morocco, more significant than in Egypt or in Iraq.
Jews were always at the mercy of whoever the ruler was at the time. If it was a generous, kind, democratic, so to speak, ruler, then the Jews even made it to government posts. And you just really always felt like an inferior, I wish I could say only second-class citizen. It felt more like 10th class at least citizen, constantly trying to compliment the Arab, trying to minimize yourself, trying to ingratiate yourself to the individual or the community of Arabs.
The meaning of that, dhimmi, that you have to pay every year for your living if you want to live. If you want me to guard you, I mean the imam, the government, if you want to continue living as a Jew, you are dhimmi. Dhimmi must pay special tax for his living.
The status of dhimmi, which means the protected people, and applied equally on Jews and Christians, was not always uniformly and equally applied on all lands of Islam. And that law of the dhimmi under Islamic law sometimes was abused of for the wrong, and sometimes Jews got a much better status, in fact, than what was prescribed by the Sharia.
Même lorsque les lois sur le statut de dhimmi n'étaient pas strictement appliquées, la culture de la dhimmitude, la soumission des minorités, influençait l'attitude adoptée envers les Juifs.
My grandfather was a very famous lawyer, but he would go to the shuk to buy some food, and the shuk, whoever the vegetable clerk or whatever, would say to him, "Are you a Jew?" And he would say yes. They would demand his money. If he wouldn't give all of his money, they would beat him up.
When I used to walk in the street, little children used to run after me and throw stones at me and calling me, "You are a Jew, you are a traitor," and they threw stones at only little kids.
So we're able to peek through the shutters, and I will never forget the scene of thousands of people in the streets shouting death to the Jews and having big banners and signs, and they were, lifting their fists. I was very fearful, but there was nothing really that we could do except wait until the riot was over.
I was born in Morocco, in the city of Fez, which used to be the capital city of Morocco over many centuries. What I remember from my childhood, because I was there until the age of 13 or 13 and a half, was that I grew up in fear. That's the most striking thing. In fear because every time somebody ran up the stairs, my mother used to run and lock the door. I always asked why. She said, "Oh, the Arabs make Arabs." And then when I grew up, I examined historically, and it turns out in 1912, there was a big uprising in Fez, and a couple of hundred Jews were massacred by the Arabs, Muslims, in Morocco. And since then, the Jews are living together, and they are very much afraid.
I was in school with one of my best friends, Minyawi. We were real close. He's a Muslim Egyptian. One day we were playing in the field, and he turned around and told me, "حيجي يوم حنذبح كل اليهود." One day we will slit the throat of all the Jews. I was shocked. He was one of my best friends, and I couldn't understand it. So this is the contradiction we faced at that time in Egypt when I grew up. The good times and the very bad times. The fear and the prosperity.
Même si les Juifs étaient des citoyens de deuxième classe selon la règle musulmane, leur vie dans les pays chrétiens fut souvent pire, faite de persécutions. Beaucoup de Juifs trouvèrent alors un refuge et une relative tolérance sur les terres de l'islam après leur expulsion d'Espagne. Dans les villes modernes du Moyen-Orient, les Juifs étaient partie intégrante de la société. Ainsi, dans les années 20 à Bagdad, on recensait presque 40% de Juifs.
And I remember very well Baghdad. Remember the river My family used to live in northern Baghdad. It was a very nice neighborhood, and we had very good relations with the neighbors.
Well, I remember the River Nile and the pyramids. I remember my friends and my school teacher, and I remember especially the 80,000 vibrant Jewish community.
The Jews of Iraq, they served the state of Iraq very much, more than any other minority in Iraq. The first finance minister was a Jew.
One of my relatives was a very well-known lawyer who drafted the Egyptian constitution for King Fuad in 1924. Now, not many Egyptian Muslims know that an Egyptian Jew drafted the constitution.
I think my father was a very special case because he wasn't really even considered as a Jew by most of his Muslim friends. He was an Iraqi first and foremost. He was not only really very much knowledgeable about Judaism, but also about Quran, and he could cite many surahs from the Quran, and he understood very well the Quran.
When Muslim was invited to Jews for Saturday, he said, for Chunt, Tibet we called it, it was very honored to that Muslim that he was invited to Jews.
أبجد هوس حطي كلمه شكل الأستاذ بقى منسجم أبجد هوس حطي كلمه شكل الأستاذ بقى منسجم.
Leila Murad, she was the diva, the Barbara Streisand, if you will, of the Middle East, and she was an Egyptian Jewish woman who was a beautiful singer. And to this day, people are still listening to her music and absolutely love her. Most Arabs do not know that she's Jewish.
كان فعل ماضي ما تسيبه بحاله والماضي احنا مالنا وماله كان فعل ماضي ما تسيبه بحاله والماضي احنا مالنا وماله.
My parents left Iraq around the 50s. I was born here in Israel in the Middle East. I consider myself as a Judeo-Arab, belong to the Judeo-Arab people.
Interprète de musique ethnique, Yair Dalal préserve en la réinterprétant la musique juive irakienne. Il a appris cet art auprès des musiciens juifs qui se sont enfuis de Bagdad pour Israël dans les années 50. Yair Dalal partage sa passion avec d'autres Israéliens et se produit en concert dans le monde entier.
I was 2 months ago in Germany for a peace concert. And I met 3 young musicians from Baghdad. They ran, it was in Cologne. They escaped to Cologne from Iraq. And we started to sing and play, and I played the violin and the oud. And after the concert, they came to the stage like they, with full of enthusiasm and tears in their eyes. He said, you know, my father, he's a musician. He always taught me, if you want to study to play good music, to play well, go to the Jews. Study from the Jews how to play. And he said, tonight I'm going to call him to Baghdad and to tell him I found Jewish young people that play your music.
I listen a lot to Iraqi music. I read in Arabic. You know, we cook the same food that we used to cook in Iraq. So I'm very much Iraqi as well. And this is the problem, because on the one hand, you know, I have a lot of affection for the Iraqi people, but on the other hand, I am very much hurt by what happened to us in Iraq.
Sous les puissances coloniales européennes, les lois sur le statut de dhimmi ont été en grande partie supprimées et beaucoup de juifs ont prospéré. Mais dans les années 30, une vague de nationalisme arabe a déferlé sur les pays du Moyen-Orient alors qu'ils émergeaient de la domination coloniale. Les fervents leaders du nationalisme arabe ont souvent fait des juifs le bouc émissaire du mécontentement social.
There was a pattern of Arab government, state-sanctioned, indeed state-orchestrated repression, which included intimidation, harassment, beatings, persecution, and even murder.
Many political parties, like even in the 40s, when the Ba'ath Party, of which everybody talks today, was exactly born along this line, some kind of dictatorial, let's say, thinking about the thing that where nationalism was very strong, exactly like National Socialism in Germany.
Haj Amin al-Husseini, the Palestinian Mufti, was meeting with the Fuhrer himself, with Hitler, and proposed a final solution to the Jews throughout the Middle East and North Africa. And the Hitler, of course, was delighted.
En 1940, Haj Amin al-Husseini était le plus grand dirigeant des Arabes palestiniens. Il était aussi à la tête de la plus haute autorité arabe de l'époque, l'Organisation politique centrale des Arabes de Palestine. Il a discuté avec Hitler de la mise en place de camps de concentration au Moyen-Orient. Sur les ondes de la radio nazie, il a prononcé un discours adressé au monde arabe dans lequel il ordonnait « Arabes, levez-vous comme un seul homme et luttez pour vos droits sacrés. Tuez les Juifs partout où vous les trouverez. » Ces mots se sont répercutés à travers tout le Moyen-Orient.
In Iraq, in the 1930s, you had the pro-Nazi government, which led to the Farhud in 1941, in which Jews were completely massacred. What happened was that the mobs went rioting through the Jewish ghetto. They would pull babies apart from their limbs till they broke. They would rape women and daughters in front of the families.
They pulled the Jew among all passengers in the bus. Who is the Jew? And they did the Jew out, they killed them outside the bus. Or they entered the houses and they looted. Jews run from roof to roof. In Baghdad, you know, the houses are close, are very close, and you can run on the roof. Some of the neighbors of the Jews, they were with those who attacked their neighbors, with the police, and they killed, they looted, and that's what they did, and they forgot all the friendship.
Throughout Libya, Egypt, you know, all these different countries, Syria, you hear all of these instances of riots leading to torture, massacre of Jews.
اليهود كلاب العرب. The Jews are the dogs of the Arabs. Or اذبح اليهود. Slit the throat of the Jews. Slaughter the Jews. These were not only on posters, but the people were chanting them. And this was scary to see a crowd coming towards you chanting اذبح اليهود, kill the Jews.
This wasn't just mobs and demonstrations. This was actual killings of civilians, innocent civilians who were Jewish. And it really created a tremendous fear in the Jewish population, especially for my own parents. My mother had to run through rooftops to escape the mob that was out to kill many of the Jews in her neighborhood.
כן, אני הייתי בת 13 באותו זמן, בזמן המוראות. וראיתי את הזוועה הזאת, ועד היום, מול העיניים שלי. הערבים קמו והורגים, שורפים והורגים. והתחילו לפרוץ בתים, להרוג, לשבור, לא השאירו. ואנחנו פחדנו מאוד.
راستی و یبرد حرا راستی برسی حرا عش تفسوتی أربيت وقعد كم ماشين محسلهم زي سيمان تري راتسول حتوخت يدايم ويترجلايم ويتروش كمو مابا هيم غرزينيم عاشني مسليم ويحشبوش أني ميت.
خمستي حيدا مساتي لديم عويمة شي شيفا شموني تنيم تنقود كخ خايسة شكولا بيت عويمة حات سوفين خياح شل بنادم شل بسش بدم ويا كشي.
My neighbor, who was an Egyptian Muslim, actually saved our lives because he came down and told the mob that was rioting that there was no Jews living in the building, which was not true. My family were in hiding.
In that kind of instability, the only thing you really have left is the trust in a good friend who can help you out of difficult situations, like the righteous Gentiles, you know, the righteous Arabs. And there were some. You can't let anyone tell you there weren't. There were a lot of Arabs who were very good to the Jews.
Certains individus montraient certes de la compassion pour les Juifs, mais les leaders continuaient à inciter à la haine. Les gouvernements arabes exercèrent de nouvelles pressions sur les Juifs, ce qui rendit leurs conditions de vie insupportables.
We're talking about Nuremberg-type laws which criminalized being a Jew and characterized Jews as enemies of the state, which stripped Jews of their citizenship, which sequestered or forcibly seized their property and assets.
In 1941, there was one nationalist leader, Kailani, who organized a big uprising against the British occupiers and so forth, and they take the same opportunity to massacre the Jews. And in Farhud, they also massacred the Jews. The British interfered, and after they massacred what they massacred, the things ended. But it has to be always pointed out that anti-British sentiment went with anti-Semitic sentiment.
When I witnessed the persecution, the hatred within the school and within the neighborhood, within the city, within the country of Iraqis, I came into decision, and my mother, my parents also, that country wasn't so our country, and we had to leave.
بدون رجوع meant without the chance of coming back, a one-way trip. This is what the Egyptian government did to many Jewish families. When they kicked them out, they stamped on their travel documents, بدون رجوع. We don't want to see you again. This is a one-way trip.
Well, in 1948, we were some 100,000 Jewish in Egypt, and now you can find there only perhaps 20, 30 old people. So we could say that the Jewish community in Egypt is not anymore. It's finished, vanished.
As I was watching the door close, and it was a little bit dark, the lights were off, the sun wasn't strong anymore, the curtains were down, and there was this beautiful home, neat, clean, the beds were made, all these beautiful Persian rugs, big rugs, and we were just closing it, and we left.
We left, and we lost everything. We lost the business, we lost his manufacturing shop and his retail shop, and we left behind, unfortunately, a very beautiful villa with a garden full of orange blossoms and lemon blossoms, which till now I can remember.
When we reached the airport, we had no idea what was going to happen. I mean, I had no idea if we were going to see our parents again, if we were going to be reunited again, if we were going to get killed or be let go or nothing. We knew nothing.
The only thing we could take with us were a few clothes. I had left a very valuable and very dear stamp collection, but I did take out with me my Star of David. It was made by my grandfather, and the necklace was made by my father. I was able to get it out, and luckily they didn't search me, because if they had, the Egyptian authorities at the customs would have pulled it from my neck.
Au Yémen, les Juifs firent face à une vague d'émeutes. Les groupes internationaux de secours commencèrent à planifier le départ d'urgence par avion de Juifs yéménites pour Israël. Mais beaucoup d'entre eux n'avaient jamais vu d'avion auparavant. Shimon Avi Zemer, juif yéménite qui avait fui vers la Palestine en 1935, fut renvoyé au Yémen avec pour mission de délivrer du danger des milliers de Juifs.
When I came to this desert, there were nearly 4,000 people in the desert, in that camp, that terrible camp. There was only sand and very little huts that they live in. What we had to do, only to teach them, to prepare them for Israel, to teach them the Hebrew. You know, in that desert, I had 2,500 pupils, 2,500 pupils from 3 years old until 60 years old. And they loved their learning, and spirit was very high. In what? In that desert, in that sand, in that terrible heat. Terrible heat. They never complained. Why? Because they waited. They hoped. They knew that tomorrow we shall be saved. Tomorrow we shall go to Israel. On Shabbat, we read that part of the Torah. It was Parashat Yitro. And in Parashat Yitro, we read that word, Va'esa etchem al kanfe nesharim va'avi etchem. And I shall take you, with the eagle wings, to Israel. The Jewish community in Yemen lived the Torah, and they believed that the Nesher, this Nesher, is the aeroplane. It's the aeroplane. And when the aeroplane came the following day, on the Sunday, the eagle, or if you want, the aeroplane, came and took the first wave to Eretz Israel. وثجد ابن إسرائيل التمر إيثام أشر أصيثي لمصرايم وأسود خام الكنفين شوريم وذي الخام
Pour ceux qui restèrent dans les pays arabes, la persécution des gouvernements se fit plus forte encore. En 1969, Saddam Hussein commençait son ascension vers le pouvoir. Comme démonstration de sa force, il organisa la pendaison publique de 9 juifs en plein centre de Bagdad. 500 000 personnes assistèrent à la scène.
And it was shown all over the world on TV, and there were masses of people there singing and dancing, around the bodies. In 1972, it was on the eve of Yom Kippur. After receiving really such sad letters from my father, that he felt so lonely, and he was really hoping that, he get a passport and join us. We heard that he was actually abducted on his way to the synagogue, and we don't know until today what happened to him. Exactly. We didn't really have Kaddish for my father throughout these years.
En Égypte, à la suite de la guerre des 6 jours, le gouvernement arrêta tous les hommes juifs et les mit dans des camps de concentration.
They took the 400 male Jews between the age of 16 and 60 and put them in these concentration camps. One of them is called Abu Zabal. And they beat them, and they tortured them, and they humiliated them. The things they did, I cannot say, because they are so horrible. My uncle was in there, and many of my relatives were included.
The persecution of the governments of Arab countries made the Jews in Arab countries desire to leave their origin country, but they didn't how, because no country was ready to receive them. So when the State of Israel was established, suddenly we have a shelter, and the Jews came to Israel.
When Israel was created, what it did was it unshackled the Jew from being under the rule and the control of Arabs and Islam. They became free and independent. And for the Arabs and for the Muslims, it is unacceptable for the Jew to be independent, because for 14 centuries, the Jews were under them.
According to the Muslims and the Dhimmi rules, a majority state of Jews, a state where Jews are a majority or they are the rulers, is non-existent. It must never exist.
Le gouvernement du jeune État d'Israël n'avait que peu d'argent et fit face à une guerre déclarée par 7 des pays arabes voisins. 680 000 juifs orientaux furent arrachés à ces pays, dans des camps de réfugiés appelés Mahabarot. Ils se retrouvèrent sous des tentes qui pouvaient à peine les protéger de la pluie et de la boue.
They were put into tents, wooden huts. More than 10 years, those Jews were in tents as refugees.
My grandmother recalls that when they first got to the Mahabarot and food was very scarce, and because couscous is a national dish in Libya, and it was not so easily available at the time, she used to take dry bread and dry it up in the sun and make into little bowls just to make it look like it was couscous.
À la création de l'État, ces réfugiés, les Mizrahim, luttèrent pour surmonter la discrimination sociale.
I was really surprised myself how we did it here, because when we came we had nothing. We were for two years in the Mahabarot. You know what a Mahabara is. It's a place with a tent which the government gave us as refugees. I was a refugee for 2 years living in a tent. Imagine in the winter with the cold and in the summer with the heat. So, but what the Egyptian community did here was just, how to call it, they became self-made persons here.
The Iraqi Jews are hardworking people. They are very well educated, and you know they were in the first line in the Iraqi economy. So, in a way, they shifted all their skills to the Israeli efforts to establish a good economy and a good society.
Il ne reste plus de juifs aujourd'hui en Libye. Dans le passé, la synagogue d'Arvichi de Tripoli était fréquentée le Shabbat et les fêtes par de très nombreux fidèles. Aujourd'hui, elle est abandonnée et saccagée. Seules quelques dizaines de juifs restent en Irak, en Égypte, au Yémen, en Syrie et au Liban. Aux portes de Beyrouth, la synagogue Hamdoun est vide. Au Maroc, la synagogue El Fessaïn de l'ancien quartier juif de Fès est devenue un club de boxe. Après que les Juifs se sont sauvés d'Irak en 1955, cette synagogue a été transformée en mosquée. Une route a été construite au-dessus de ce vieux cimetière juif. Des traces de pas laissent apparaître d'anciennes tombes juives. Les grandes communautés du Moyen-Orient, qui autrefois comptaient des centaines de milliers de Juifs, n'existent plus. Au total, près d'1 million de Juifs ont fui les pays arabes et l'Iran. Des centaines de communautés juives ont subi une purification ethnique.
Behind every intimidation, behind every silencing, behind every persecution, behind every beating or murder of Jews from Arab lands, behind every property sequestered, behind every assets seized, behind every bank account blocked, we're talking about the historiography of an entire community.
If I say, who are the Middle East refugees, people don't think at all about the Jews. All the people think about are the Palestinians.
Many people ask me, why do you call yourself forgotten refugees? It is interesting to note that in the history of the Middle East, we have been totally cut out of the picture.
The United Nations General Assembly since 1947 has adopted 687 resolutions on the Arab-Israeli conflict. 101 of those resolutions dealt with refugees. But all those 101 resolutions dealt with Palestinian refugees only. It's astonishing to realize that not one resolution, not one of these resolutions ever dealt with the issue of Jewish refugees from Arab lands.
So it was change of population between the Jews and Arabs. Both of them were refugees.
About 50% of the Jewish population today in Israel is made up of Mizrahi Jews, Jews like myself who came from the Arab countries. We are the face of Israel.
Anti-Semitism now in the Arab world is 100 times worse than when I lived there. It permeates every sector of Egyptian society and Arab Islamic society. In the mosque, in the school, in everyday conversation, on television. I don't think there can ever be peace unless they can become more tolerant towards their own cousins, the Jews.
I think the only path to peace is when people can open their hearts and listen to the stories of everyone involved. And this means both the positive things, the points of connection between Arabs and Jews, where there's an overlap of culture, and also the points of oppression.
Peace will not depend on my belief. Peace will depend on certain things that have to happen. First of all, accommodation. That is to say, the Arabs have to realize that the Jewish state is here to stay and to make peace with it, and then to negotiate the terms. We want this, we want that, that's legitimate. But if you want to destroy your neighbor, you can never have peace. That's my main problem with them. If there is a recognition and accommodation, the sky is the limit, everything is possible.
We were so happy when Israel signed peace with Egypt. It was like a dream coming true. We couldn't believe when Sadat came. We were so happy, and we hoped that it will continue with the other Arab countries.
We are here, Jews from all over the world. We are not just from Europe. And this is our culture. And we have to transfer it to the next generation. It's part of our life. It's part of Judaism.
Only when the state of Israel, this is the only shelter, open its gate, we have the shelter, we have the house, our house in Israel, and I am many proud, much proud to be Israeli, much proud. My grandchildren, grandsons, granddaughter, all of them are serving the army, and they are contributing to the state of Israel as a whole. I wish that the peace takes place between us, between the neighbors.
The peace will come, will appear, must, because each human wants to live. All human wants to live. He wants his family, his children to continue living. And if we continue this way of killing each other, of these troubles, and so on and so forth, I mean, there is no hope for them, there is no hope for us.
We were really the forgotten refugees, and nobody talked about us. And, you know, we were really humiliated, and we didn't get much attention also. So we swallowed our pain and agony and moved on. On the one hand, it actually improved our situation in integrating in the Israeli society and establishing a new life. But on the other hand, we felt like a great injustice has been done to us.
We don't want to be forgotten anymore. We want to tell our story. We don't want our heritage, which is 3,000 years old, which is rich, to be forgotten. We want our children to remember us so that we can perpetuate the memory of all these 1 million Jews who were kicked out of the Arab world and who will never return, بدون رجوع.
The Arab governments have taken away our homes. They've taken away our culture. They have destroyed our communities, but they can never take away our spirit to fight for justice.
What's important to me is that the stories of everybody be told, and that everybody's history be recognized and everybody's rights be honored.